What even is a Ditto? I mean, really, what is it? Because in a world where a literal ring of keys is a viable combat partner, weirdness is just part of the game. And yet, there is one creature that manages to be at the top of the weirdness ladder. This here is the Play-Doh plagiarist, Blob the Builder himself, Ditto. Welcome to Mystery Science Gaming, the only MSG you actually need, the show where we scientifically investigate gaming's most amorphous purple creatures. I'm your host, Papa Goron, and today we are asking the surprisingly complicated question, what even is a Ditto? Ditto has been around since the very beginning of Pokémon, since 1996 when the original Pokémon Red and Green were released in Japan. Ditto has been a staple in the series and part of the original 151. Wow. Yet despite his place in Pokémon history, Ditto's origins and identity are shrouded in mystery. Ditto has appeared in every single generation, yet somehow his creation and place in Pokémon lore has never been confirmed. But that didn't stop the internet. Oh no, you all are fantastic and you love to investigate things. So do I. Because there are a ton of explanations as to where our blobby friend came from. Some people believe he is just a normal Pokemon. Others believe he is extraterrestrial primordial slime from which Mew first evolved. But by far the most common theory is that Ditto is a result of a cloning experiment gone wrong. The story has its origins at the very beginning of the Pokemon franchise. A group of scientists led by Dr. Fuji tried to recreate Mew, a mythical Pokemon that contains the DNA of every other living Pokemon. In a lab on Cinnabar Island, they tampered with the fossilized Mew DNA to create a new Pokemon, Mewtwo. But what if it took them more than a couple of tries? What if the results of hundreds of failed experiments were scattered across the land as cute pink blobs? Well, it kinda makes sense. After all, Ditto and Mew are the only Pokemon that can use the move Transform. I've got the power! They also share size, weight, and shiny colors. And on top of it all, Dittos are generally found wherever Mew and Mewtwo have been. So is that case closed already? Well, not really, because Game Freak has said in several interviews that this was never their intention. So then, what is a Ditto? Well, to start our search for the canon truth, we turned our eyes to the Pokédex, specifically the Pokédex entries for Ditto. Let's start at the very beginning with Pokemon Red and Blue. Yeah, if you didn't know, there was Pokemon Red and Green in Japan, but in America, it was Red and Blue. We were just waiting for a white version to come out so we could really salute. In the very first description of Ditto, it states, this Pokemon is capable of copying an enemy's genetic code to instantly transform itself into a duplicate of the enemy. Oh, what? Wow. Does that mean... No. If Ditto were a clone of Mew, it would already contain the DNA of all other Pokemon, because Mew is the original Pokemon. I mean, he's the first one, even though he's 151 in the Pokédex. We're not going to get into that. But Ditto doesn't have the DNA of every Pokemon. It has to copy the enemy's genetic code, which means Ditto is some kind of creature that has to steal DNA to transform into other creatures, not a creature that already has all the DNA stored.
You're a crook. You're a cheat and a swindler.
Okay, but what do other Pokédex entries say? Well, there's a lot of overlap, but here are some of the key entries with new information. In Pokemon Stadium, we learned that Ditto is capable of reorganizing its cells to transform into an exact duplicate of its enemy. It usually is a shapeless blob. I mean, but a cute one. That means it has more than one cell, so it can't be an amoeba or some bacterium. In Pokemon Ruby, Ditto rearranges its cell structure to transform itself into other shapes. However, if it tries to transform itself into something by relying completely on its memory, this Pokemon managed to get the details wrong sometimes. That means it's not perfect. Well, neither am I forget things all the time. Oh, and we learn even more in Pokemon Sun. While Ditto can transform into anything, each Ditto apparently has its own strengths and weaknesses when it comes to transformations. So that means that Ditto is a creature that can steal DNA and use that DNA to transform its body and use new abilities. But it's not perfect, and each individual Ditto performs differently. And on top of that, we have even newer data, because unless you were living under a rock, you know we have a new Pokemon game featuring Ditto as the main character. Pokopia. The perfect blend of Pokemon and Animal Crossing. I spent hundreds of hours in this game. But as whimsical as this game is, it does give us some cold hard facts about Ditto. First, we know Ditto can somehow survive extremely dry conditions, which actually makes sense. Because in the Pokédex entry for Pokemon Diamond, it states, Ditto has the ability to reconstitute its entire cellular structure. Reconstitute literally means to reassemble by adding liquid. That means Ditto can survive being completely dried out and can reassemble after a little liquid is added. We also learn in Pokopia that Ditto can survive falling from great heights. He can turn his mouth into a vacuum cleaner, and he can even store large objects inside his body. I mean, how convenient would that be? Like, you don't need to park your car anymore. You could just suck it up and then just walk around a little bit. And then, oh, I need to drive home now. Bleh, car. Might give you some indigestion though. Wow, this list of Ditto traits is getting weird. Which raises an obvious question. Is Ditto actually impossible? Well, to find out, we had to do what any reasonable scientist would do. We dug through the entire history of life on Earth to find an animal with Ditto's powers.
Great Scott.
Look, if you haven't subscribed yet and you're a nerd watching this, you're in right company. We go into quite a bit of detail on this channel. Let's start with our list. We are looking for an organism that can do these 8 things. Survive extreme dehydration and reconstitute its cells, turn its mouth into a vacuum, store large objects in its body and get them back out again, survive from high falls and other severe damage, mimic the shape and powers of other creatures, have variation in their mimicking abilities, turn back into a blob when inactive, and finally, the big hitter, the big Bambino himself, steal the DNA from other creatures and use it to change their body shape and abilities. And if you're thinking we made this whole video without finding something that can do that, you should stick around. We broke our search up into 2 parts. First, we looked for creatures that have even one of these powers. And second, are there any creatures that can do all 8? We started right where Pokopia starts, surviving the Pokemon apocalypse. Are there any creatures that can survive that kind of dehydration? Well, actually, yes, there is. There are a ton of creatures that can do this. And you might have some in your house right now. And no, I'm not talking about your cats or your dogs. Oh, but hey, look, before you start checking under your bed for monsters, you should know there are millions of tiny creatures in your house that help us survive things that would definitely destroy us. So don't freak out. Make sure to wash your hands, but there are things that help you that are very small. If you enjoy bread as much as Mama Goron does, you probably have a packet of yeast somewhere in your refrigerator. And that's actually a dried out organism. As soon as you add moisture, that yeast comes to life and starts processing sugar into carbon dioxide. That makes your bread rise. But we know Ditto isn't made of yeast. At least I don't think it is, because his Pokédex entry states that he has multiple cells. I'm glad we don't have any Ditto loafs in game. Although that would be really cool, like bakery thing, like in Lumio City is like a bakery that did Ditto cakes. Ditto cakes. It's coming to next Pokemon game near you. So what else can dry out completely? Well, if you have a fish tank in your house, you might also have some brine shrimp. Or, as most people would refer to them, sea monkeys. Which is a terrible name, by the way, because they are not monkeys. They do not live in the sea. Who named this stuff? Probably some troll, some historic troll that name things. I'm gonna name Greenland, Greenland, and Iceland, Iceland. People be trolling throughout history.
You've just been pranked by the Prank Patrol.
But sea monkeys are tiny little crustaceans and can sit entirely dehydrated and in a vacuum for 10 years. And the instant you add water, bam, new shrimp. But there are even bigger plants and animals that can go long periods without water. The North American resurrection fern is a great example of this. It can lose up to 97% of its water for an entire decade. It goes from beautiful green to a crunchy black mess, and the instant it rains, the fern comes back to life. Talk about a miracle. I wish my houseplants had that superpower. Every plant I have ever owned doesn't make it a week. Also, don't trust me with a goldfish anytime soon. So there are a lot of creatures that can come back from a completely dry state. But what about our second requirement? Because Ditto can vacuum things up from his surroundings. Well, surprisingly, that's common too. And you might think that turning your mouth into a vacuum cleaner would limit us to animals, but you would be wrong. One of the coolest vacuum eaters in the world is the bladderwort. The bladderwort is a tiny underwater carnivorous plant, and it's actually the fastest carnivorous plant in the world. When an insect triggers the hairs on the plant, it creates a suction force of 600 to 2,800 Gs. Whoa! The entire process from trigger to trap closing only takes 10 milliseconds. That's a lot of force. But I think we all know that Ditto probably isn't an underwater plant. He certainly doesn't look like it. So are there any mobile creatures that can do this? Well, actually, there are a lot. Animals like the Singjaw wrassie and the frogfish can instantly expand their mouths. The sudden drop in pressure causes a massive suction effect, pulling in unsuspecting prey. In fact, frogfish are the fastest feeders in the animal kingdom. These grumpy-looking rocks can expand their oral cavity to 12 times its original volume in just 6 milliseconds. This generates a force of up to 280 Gs. And of course, when we're talking about suction feeders, we can't forget about the world record holders, filter feeding whales. Now, some whales, like the blue whale, force water in their mouths through momentum, but other whales, like humpbacks and gray whales, use suction. To create suction, gray whales lay on the ocean floor and pull their tongues backward to create suction. Imagine it like a giant piston inside a syringe. When the piston pulls back, whatever liquid is around the syringe gets pulled in. So could Ditto be any of these creatures? Maybe. In Pocopia, we can see that he has to quickly open his mouth to create suction. The jaw-dropping suction looks just like a frogfish feeding. And once Ditto sucks things in, he can store those large objects in his body and get them back out again. Surely there aren't any creatures on Earth with an internal inventory, right? Okay, admittedly, this one is actually a little tricky because it mostly comes down to animals with cool pockets. I mean, who doesn't love cool pockets? And one of the cutest examples is the sea otter. Oh my gosh, look at these guys. Oh, I just want to take you home. Sea otters have extra folds of skin along their arms that form pockets for carrying important things like food and their favorite rock. Man, my 4-year-old needs one of those. He's always bringing me really cool rocks to carry. Look, if you don't get your kid into rocks early, you're doing it wrong. Get him into rocks. Rocks are cool. Geology is cool. Other animals like pelicans and chipmunks can store food in their mouths. Oh, pelicans can store up to 3 gallons or 11 liters of water, and fish in their gular pouch can store just as much. And chipmunks can store up to 60 acorns. That's up to 80% of their own body weight. Don't try that at home, kids. Okay, but Ditto clearly doesn't have a cheek pouch. I mean, he's not literally chipmunking his inventory in his cheeks. We would be able to see that. Well, it turns out there are some animals that have more internal storage. One example is the gastric brooding frogs. Yes, you heard that right. Gastric, like stomach, and brooding, like keeping your eggs warm. These Australian frogs swallow their own eggs and then prevent them from accidentally digesting them. The female frog completely shuts down her stomach. The babies hatch inside, and then, when they are ready, the mother frog literally regurgitates 20 fully formed froglets. Man, I am so glad that is not how human pregnancy works. Now that I think about it, maybe that's why we don't see what happens in the Pokemon nursery. Okay, 3 traits down and 4 to go. So far, everything Ditto does is absolutely possible in nature, but we still have some serious abilities to get to. Next up, we know that Ditto can survive from falling from tall cliffs. He just squishes and comes back into his regular form. And surprisingly, there are a lot of creatures that can sustain that kind of damage. And the funniest example of this is mice. Mice have such a low terminal velocity that they don't take any fall damage. In fact, this phenomenon is so surprising that JBS Haldane, one of the founders of modern genetics, stated that you can drop a mouse down a 1,000-yard mine shaft, and on arriving at the bottom, it gets a slight shock and just gets up and walks away. Yep, that's right, folks. Mickey Mouse is invincible.
Well, all right.
But mice aren't gooey like Ditto. Are there any animals that use goo power to survive falls? Of course there are.
Yeah, boy.
Nature loves goo, and the kings of goo are slugs. A land slug can fall from a multi-story building, hit the pavement, and flatten into a pancake, then casually crawl away completely unharmed. Flatworms even take this to a higher level because slugs still have an internal body cavity to worry about. Flatworms have no body cavity at all, just solid squishy tissue with almost infinite regeneration abilities. That's another check mark for everything Ditto can do being absolutely possible. But the next few Ditto powers are where things are gonna get tricky. We're gonna go ahead and combine the next 3 because we need to see if there are any creatures that can mimic the shape or abilities of other creatures, have individual variation in how good their mimicry is, and the ability to turn themselves back into their original shape. Oh man, I'm so tired. I guess I didn't get enough sleep last night. Give me a second, guys. Mew, hold down the fort. I'm gonna go take a power nap. Being an internet scientist and dad can be exhausting, and getting enough sleep can feel like a chore. That's why today's sponsor is Manta Sleep. Manta Sleep provides premium sleep masks that help ensure your night's sleep is uninterrupted and comfortable. With Manta Sleep masks, all light is effectively blocked out without giving your eyes any extra strain. With their fully adjustable eye cup, each mask can fit any size head and provide maximum comfort. Manta Sleep has a variety of sleep masks, all designed to fit your unique situation. Our personal favorite was the Cool Mask, and although it actually makes you look quite cool, it in fact has these amazing eye cups you can freeze. I quite often have sinus pressure and headaches living up in the mountains, but placing these on my eyes helps reduce inflammation pressure and help me get to sleep faster. Check out Manta Sleep's awesome mask at the link in the description below and grab 10% off your first order using the code PapaGoron10. And thanks so much to Manta Sleep for sponsoring this video. Now, back to the video. Well, it turns out imitation is super common in nature, but most organisms can only mimic one other thing. One of the coolest examples of this is the pharaoh cuttlefish. Most cuttlefish have the ability to change color and texture of their skin, but the pharaoh cuttlefish can actually mimic a crustle. No, not the Pokemon. I mean the hermit crab. They even behave like a hermit crab as well. Instead of swimming, the cuttlefish walks along the ground. Any prey nearby doesn't run, because who would suspect a cute little hermit crab? And just like Ditto, some of these cuttlefish are better at the disguise than others. Crab spiders are also the master of disguise. Most species of crab spiders mimic flowers or leaves. There is even one that specifically makes itself look like stinky bird poop. I feel like that's kind of cool, but also like, what a crappy disguise. Boo! But the ant-mimicking crab spider is the master of all. These spiders move their front legs to look like antennae and stretch their bodies to mimic the shape of ants, which is great for getting close to the weaver ants it eats. The only problem? Well, just like Ditto, the mimicry takes practice. Remember that episode in the Pokemon anime, Ditto's Mystery Mansion? If you're like me, you grew up in a generation where TV was awesome, and you got home from school when you were able to watch this. That Ditto in the anime is pretty good at mimicry, but it just can't get the face right. But by the end of the episode, it finally learns how to get faces right and mimics them just right. Well, crab spiders are actually the same way. Adults can do near flawless ant impersonations, but young spiders frequently mess up the leg angles. And well, it doesn't turn out well for them. Yikes. But like I said, all these animals can only mimic one thing: a rock, an ant, poop on a leaf. But there is one animal who stands above the rest as a master of disguise, even more than the spider: the mimic octopus. The mimic octopus is one of the coolest creatures on our planet. Not only is it an octopus, which is a highly intelligent animal that uses its arms to think, can edit its own genetic code, and solve puzzles faster than any other animal, but the mimic octopus can also morph its body to impersonate multiple different toxic animals. Some of the most common choices are venomous soulfish, lionfish, and venomous sea snakes. And just like Ditto, they use these disguises in battle. Mimic octopi quickly assess the enemy and choose a disguise that will give them the greatest defense. See an aggressive damselfish? Bam! Sea snake impersonation. Sharks? Straight to lionfish. See a big predatory fish? Time to turn into a toxic, bad-tasting flatfish. This is one of the only animals that can mimic other creatures on purpose and then instantly transform back into its original form. Okay, but I can hear you now. Papa Goron, are you trying to tell us that Ditto is an octopus? I mean, it would explain the alien Ditto origin theory. But no, that's not what I'm saying, because we still have one more Ditto trait to check out. Ditto doesn't just pretend to be other Pokemon. He literally steals DNA and turns into them. And surely that's impossible, right? There can't be any creatures on Earth that can steal DNA of other organisms and actually use them. Well, hold on to your butts, because surprisingly, yes, there is. Because it turns out one of nature's coolest and strangest things is a process called horizontal gene transfer. Come on, guys. It's not that kind of video. Get your mind out of the gutter. Although the process actually kind of works the same, but horizontal gene transfer happens when organisms like bacteria pick up loose DNA from their surroundings. They literally grab any genetic material that is floating around and add it to their own DNA. It's nature's version of finding a random USB drive, plugging it in, and hoping there's something useful on it. Which you should never do! Papa Goron tip segment, do not, I repeat, do not just throw some random USB drive you find on the street into your computer. Likely it has something malicious on there. It is going to give someone access to your device through the internet and create a backdoor. Don't do that, okay? Where was I?
Stop it. Get some help.
Oh, yes, DNA. Okay, but here's a catch. That DNA doesn't have to be from the same species. That means that these organisms can steal DNA from completely unrelated organisms and then add that DNA into their own genome. But that's mostly bacteria, right? We already established that Ditto can't be bacteria. He has more than one cell. So, are there any multicellular creatures that can do this? Well, some of you fancy people might be thinking of the tardigrade. Because, let's be honest, those of you who are water bear fans have been rooting for this little guy to be the answer since the video started. In 2015, a huge paper came out titled Evidence for Extensive Horizontal Gene Transfer from the Draft Genome of a Tardigrade. However, don't get too excited, because the water bear isn't a contender here. As cute as they are, later in the same year, other papers debunked this finding. It turns out that the original results were due to sample contamination. Scientists, clean your stuff. Sterilize, clean, produce, okay? Sterilize. Good science. So is that it? Are there no animals with Ditto's identity theft superpower? Of course there are. Animal superpowers are crazy, and planet Earth is freaking awesome. Some of the most common examples of DNA left in animals are all about color. In general, animals cannot create carotenoid pigments. Those are any pigments that make bright red and orange colors. If you see a red or orange bird outside, like a northern cardinal or a European robin, it stole those colors from its food. And I don't mean the DNA. I mean it literally ate orange food, and instead of it digesting those pigments, it absorbed them and moved them to its feathers. But there is one animal that is an exception. Aphids can actually make their own red pigments from scratch. In the distant past, the ancestors of aphids stole DNA from a fungus. It fused some of those genes into its own DNA and started producing its own pigments. Okay, but that was a long time ago. Ditto can take DNA whenever it wants to. Well, so can the emerald green sea slug. Emerald sea slugs start life as a small brown ordinary looking slug, but once it starts eating, everything changes. Its favorite food is yellow-green algae, and it doesn't just digest it for energy. It does a process called kleptoplasty. It actually cuts up the plant cells and steals the chloroplasts. Chloroplasts are the green pigment-filled sacs that allow plants to get energy from the sun. Then the slugs use those pigments to transform their bodies from a little brown slug into an incredibly green leaf. And they can actually photosynthesize too, which is incredible. Except it's not that simple, because chloroplasts can't survive very long in an animal body. Animals don't have the right proteins to support photosynthesis. Well, no problem, because the sea slug can actually steal the DNA from algae too. Through horizontal gene transfer, emerald sea slugs have everything they need to completely transform themselves into a pretend plant. And with that, do we have the answer to our first question? Are Ditto's powers possible in the real world? Absolutely. Every single thing that Ditto can do is possible. But the question is there anything on Earth that can do all 8 things. Is it possible that there's a Ditto-like creature that's been right under our noses, that's been here the whole time? Well, hold on to your butts and meet the Dittoid rotifer. I mean, just look at that smile. If that isn't a real-life Ditto, I don't know what is. But can the Dittoid rotifer actually stand up to all 8 Ditto skills? Let's find out. Number 1, Ditto can survive extreme dehydration and then reconstitute his cells. And somehow, this can do that even better. Dittoid rotifers can undergo something called anhydrobiosis, which basically means they can survive being completely dried out. They do this by entering an inactive state called a ton. Think Han Solo and Carbonite. They literally shut themselves down and wait out the danger. In this state, they can survive things that would normally destroy life: extreme heat, radiation, and even the vacuum of space. Then the moment a single drop of water comes, they come right back. They wake right back up and they're immediately ready to get back to blasting stormtroopers. That's one check for the rotifer. Okay, but what about vacuums? The vacuum mouth in Pocopia. Ditto's cleanup skills are pretty extreme. But the rotifer, again, takes the cake, literally. Rotifers suck up basically anything in their path. So yeah, they would definitely take a cake. Wait, is that where my portal cake went? It wasn't a lie. The rotifer ate it! Around the mouth of the Dittoid rotifer is a structure called the corona. The corona is basically a wheel of thousands of tiny hairs, which is just as creepy as it sounds. But as those hairs move back and forth, they create a vortex that pulls in nearby algae, water, and even microplastics. It basically is an indiscriminate biological vacuum. No, Ditto! I only wanted to take the beans. Oh, never mind. I guess I have to go all the way to Dream Island to get rid of all this random junk. Okay, well now that we know that the Dittoid rotifer can suck things in, can it also store objects in its body and get them around unharmed? Well, again, yes. If you sliced a Ditto open, you probably wouldn't find a standard chest cavity with lungs and a heart. Instead, you'd likely find a flexible, fluid-filled sac, which is exactly what the inside of a rotifer looks like. This false body cavity is called a pseudocoelom. That means their organs and anything they ate are basically just floating freely inside their body. In fact, when scientists were trying to understand plastic pollution, they fed rotifers brightly covered plastic beads. And since their bodies are transparent, you can actually see the beads moving around inside them. But still, that leaves one big question. What happens when those items come back out? After all, Ditto has an internal inventory. I don't want to get my beds and chairs all chewed up and then spat back out. Well, rotifers can do that too. When they need to get rid of indigestible objects, they tighten all their muscles and physically force things back out.
You don't want to be like this. This is disgusting. This is awful in every way. If I could kill it, I would. But I legally can't. But I've considered it.
But what about fall damage? Can the rotifer survive a fall from a high cliff? Absolutely. In fact, they do it on a regular basis. First of all, just like the mice we talked about earlier in the video, rotifers benefit from low terminal velocity. But why is their terminal velocity so low? The real secret is the square cube law. As an organism gets smaller, its volume and mass shrink much faster than its surface area. Now, that sounds a bit abstract, but here's how it works. Mass and volume are the weight that pulls you down faster. Surface area is what fights against the air like a parachute. Since rotifers are tiny, they have a huge amount of surface area slowing them down compared to their body mass, speeding them up. So basically, their bodies act like their own parachute, decreasing their terminal velocity. And what's even cooler is they rely on this all the time. Rotifers like to live in wet places like puddles, but when a puddle dries up, they go into an extreme dehydration state. Then they rely on the wind to carry them to the next wet area. But wind is kinda hard to control. That means they often get lifted up, travel thousands of miles up into the upper atmosphere, only to fall back down unharmed. That's a little bit more fall damage than we would ever put Ditto through. I wonder if Ditto would ever survive skydiving. If he can mimic clothes, could he mimic a parachute? I guess he could just turn into a drift bloom, or in this case, he could just turn into a Dragonite and fly away, glide down, or even Magnemite if you've gotten that far. So we know that the Deltoid Rotifer can do the first 4 Ditto skills, but those are easy. If it can't steal DNA and mimic other creatures, then it's not a Ditto. Well, that's where this gets really cool. When the Deltoid Rotifer enters its dehydrated state, it literally shatters its DNA. Yes, shatters. And I don't mean just a little damage. I mean it breaks the DNA all the way across both strands. Then, when it rehydrates, it has to build that DNA and stitch itself back together. But there's a problem. There's a lot of other DNA floating around in the water, from dead bacteria, plant fungi, and even other animals. So when the rotifer is repairing itself, it can't always tell the difference. It just takes in whatever DNA is nearby and literally stitches it into its own genome. And that means the Deltoid rotifers can end up with about 10% of their DNA coming from other organisms. And I hear what you're thinking. 10% doesn't sound like much, but actually, most organisms share a surprising amount of DNA. For example, mammals share about 90% of their DNA with humans. Fish and amphibians and reptiles share about 70% with us. And even plants share roughly 50% of their active DNA with people. So an extra 10% can actually go a long way. If Ditto already has the core blueprint to be a Pokémon, the pieces it picks up from its opponents could be pretty small and still make a noticeable difference. But how can the same set of DNA make something like a cute fuzzy Growlithe and a little round Rowlet? Well, there are 3 ways this happens. The first is that most of the proteins coded by DNA do the same thing in every animal. The biological blueprint for building muscle, digesting food, and making nerves fire are practically universal. The second is something called phenotypic plasticity. Literally, the exact same set of genes can be used differently to build completely different physical traits. Basically, organisms can turn DNA on or off whenever the conditions are right. In humans, this includes things like tanning. In the winter, when there is less UV radiation from the sun, your skin produces less melanin. And when the UV radiation ramps up, your body triggers the on switch for that section of DNA, and your melanin production increases. Deltoid rotifers do this too. If a rotifer is in a pond with just a small bacteria for food, it grows a mouth like a straw. But if it lands in a pond with big clumps of algae, it grows a bigger mouth with scary grinding plates called ramate trophy. And what's even cooler, the Deltoid rotifer can also use its stolen DNA in the same way. Depending on which DNA it has stolen, they can have different superpowers. Some of these powers include using bacterial genes to prevent ice damage, fungal genes that prevent oxidative damage, like putting a rust protective paint on your outdoor furniture. And they can even steal genes that allow them to grow spines or produce toxins. But with Deltoid rotifers, there's an extra step. It's not just the trait coding DNA they need. It's also the regulatory DNA that controls how those traits are turned on and off. So if the Deltoid rotifer only picks up the trait genes, but not the matching control system, those genes might not function properly at all. So if the rotifer doesn't also steal the right epigenetic machinery, it can't control its new genes. That means some individuals can perfectly use their stolen DNA, and some individuals can't quite get the faces right. And in the end, after all the shape-shifting is done, when the water disappears and the rotifer comes back from its dormant state, it turns back into a little blob. Just a peaceful Ditto, waiting out the next apocalypse until the rain returns. But what do you think about all this research? Is the Deltoid rotifer a Ditto? Is Ditto like a Deltoid rotifer? Or do you think he's like something else? Let us know down in the comments below. And while you're down there, don't forget to like, subscribe, hype the video, check out our Discord and Patreon. And remember, like in most of our videos, we say, stay hydrated out there. My name is Papa Goron. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye.
Where have you been searching all along, confusing twilight on and on, without a clue, without a sign, without grasping at the real question to be asked. Where have I been? I'm a shapeshifter at post masquerade, hiding both face and mind, all free for you to draw. I'm a shapeshifter, what else should I be? Please don't take off my mask, feeling dark. Moments of calm, nothing left to be found. A mirror right in front of me.
Hold up.
I find an empty glass, reflecting the sad truth. It's telling words not to be told. I need the mask. I'm a shapeshifter at post masquerade, hiding both face and mind, all free for you to draw.
All this talk about animals and stuff, it's pretty crazy. What do you think, Mew? Was that pretty good? I think they enjoyed it. You know, we basically figured out what a Ditto is, but I mean, this channel's named Papa Goron after all. So I just have to ask, what is a Goron?
I'm a shapeshifter, have no face to show. Please don't take off my mask.